permanent long-term problem. It requires a permanent solution. The only permanent solution is that which involves an amendment to the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I will support this legislation, but with very serious reservations. I start with the premise that this debt ceiling extension is not the one piece of legislation that will change everything wrong in Washington. It is at best a reversal of previous tax and spend policy with some movement down the road to fiscal responsibility. The bill sets us on a course that, if we adhere to it, will eventually enable us to balance our budget, draw down our debt, put entitlement programs on a sustainable path, and create the conditions for strong economic growth. That it could have been better is absolutely true as a substantive matter. But politically, the White House and the tax and spend Democrats in Congress would not agree to more. And they control this chamber and the executive branch of government. A second premise of Republican leadership was that the United States government must pay its bills, not just to investors in U.S. bonds, but to fulfill commitments to the American people. From Social Security to national defense, we have obligations that Republicans insist must be met. So default was not an option. That meant agreeing to terms for debt extension that satisfied neither party. A third premise for Republicans was that we must focus on job creation and restoring a healthy economy. That meant not only constraining Washington spending through greater accountability, but preventing job-killing tax hikes. And in this, we succeeded. And contrary to some public talk, there is nothing in this legislation that would cause future tax increases. If there were, I wouldn't support this legislation. So with this legislation, we've prevented tax increases demanded by the President, cut spending over the next 10 years, and created a mechanism to address additional savings, especially in programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, all of which will eventually default on their commitments without reform. And we averted a credit crisis for the United States government. Here's why I have such serious reservations about the legislation. In an effort to extract a pound of flesh from Republicans, the White House, frustrated that it couldn't raise taxes, insisted on massive cuts in defense spending, some $350 billion by White House reckoning over the next 10 years, potentially $18 billion less than the President's own budget just for next year. Moreover, the White House insisted that defense suffer an additional $492 billion in cuts over the same period if the Select Committee set up by this bill fails to produce or Congress refuses to adopt recommendations on how to cut overall government spending to meet the goals of the bill. Mind you, these cuts in defense were not the result of careful planning and analysis. They were just arbitrary percentages thrown out in negotiations, totally unconnected to actual defense requirements. Worse, the cuts that would be triggered if the committee recommendations failed were intentionally designed to be so large, so unimaginable, so irresponsible that Congress would be incented to approve the Select Committee recommendations. The phrase Armageddon was used to characterize this scheme. Can you imagine anything more irresponsible for the Commander-in-Chief of the military to promote, not just promote, but insist on the knowing destruction of the U.S. military as a means to threaten Congress? The theory was the consequences of inaction by Congress must be so severe that no responsible senator or representative could dare allow the result, that we would be forced to accept the Select Committee recommendations on pain of seeing the U.S. military decimated. This should never have been agreed to by members of Congress. but most of all, should never have been promoted by the President. To me, it comes close to violating our oath of office and the President's responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief. But it is done. My vote will not change it. The best way for me to avoid this Armageddon is to stay in the fight and, if necessary, urge my colleagues to disregard this provision. 60 senators would have to agree. But I cannot imagine senators and even the President, when faced with the actual versus the hypothetical choice of knowingly destroying our military capacity to protect the United States, would allow it to happen when we would have the ability to prevent it. As reckless as this President is to even contemplate, much less threaten to incapacitate our military, I cannot imagine that the American people would countenance such action. So as I evaluate the work of the committee, if anyone says to me, well, remember, the trigger is Armageddon for the U.S. military, my response will be, let's take that debate to the American people and let them decide. The thought that this trigger would force senators to make unwise concessions underestimates the American people's commitments to their own security. The White House is miscalculated. It is so draconian that it will not work. Even this President could not implement it. So, because we cannot default on our commitments, because we have to start somewhere on our new journey toward fiscal sanity, and this is a good start, because we have to focus on job creation, not more taxes that will kill job creation, we should adopt this legislation. But because of its irresponsible and dangerous, even cavalier treatment of national defense, we will need to work very hard to restore spending necessary for our national security and commit to reject the threat of Armageddon inserted into this bill by the White House.
Note the absence of quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Before their August recess, the Senate will finish up work today by voting on the debt ceiling bill, which passed the U.S. House yesterday by a vote of 269 to 161. It will need 60 to pass, and Amy Walter, political director at ABC, tweets that Senator Hoeven now says he's a yes on the debt ceiling vote. That vote coming up at noon Eastern. Also, a couple of other briefings to tell you about. The President will be speaking about the Senate vote this afternoon. Some comments from the White House. That's expected to be at 12:15, but more than likely will happen once the vote is wrapped up in the U.S. Senate. You can follow that live on C-SPAN. It's also on cspan.org. C-SPAN will also cover the White House briefing today, and that's set for 1 p.m. Eastern.
Majority Leader.
Unanimous consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
over the past few weeks, Congress has been engaged in a very important debate. It may have been messy. It might have appeared to some like their government wasn't working. But in fact, the opposite was true. The push and pull Americans saw in Washington these past few weeks was not gridlock. It was the will of the people working itself out in a political system that was never meant to be pretty. You see, one reason America isn't already facing the kind of crisis we see in Europe is that presidents and majority parties here can't just bring about change on a dime, as much as they might like to from time to time. That's what checks and balances is all about. And that's the kind of balance Americans voted for in November. The American people sent a wave of new lawmakers to Congress in last November's election with a very clear mandate: to put our nation's fiscal house in order. Those of us who'd been fighting the big government policies of Democratic majorities in Congress welcomed them into our ranks. Together, we've held the line. And slowly but surely, we've started turning things around. That's why those who think that no problem is too big or too small for government to solve are very worried right now. They're afraid the American people may actually win the larger debate we've been having around here about the size and the scope of government, and that the spending spree may actually be coming to an end. They can't believe that those who stood up for limited government and accountability have actually changed the terms of the debate here in Washington. But today, they have no choice but to admit it. Now, I know that for some of our colleagues, reform isn't coming as fast as they would like, and I certainly understand their frustration. I, too, wish we could stand here today enacting something much more ambitious. But I'm encouraged by the thought that these new senators will help lead this fight until we finish the job. And I want to assure you today that although you may not see it this way, you've actually won this debate. In a few minutes, the Senate will vote on legislation that represents a new way of doing business in Washington. First, it creates an entirely new template for raising the nation's debt limit. One of the most important things about this legislation is the fact that never again will any president from either party be allowed to raise the debt ceiling without being held accountable for it by the American people. And, in addition to that, without having to engage in the kind of debate we've just come through. Because you see, Mr. President, whoever the next president is will be back asking to raise the debt ceiling again. It will provide another opportunity for us to focus on the subject raised by the request to raise the debt ceiling. So we'll be back at it, probably in the early part of 2013, trying to continue to make progress toward reducing the size and scope of government and reducing our spending. This kind of discussion isn't something to dread. It's something to welcome. And while the President may not have particularly enjoyed this debate we've just been through, it was a debate that Washington very much needed to have. As for the particulars, this legislation caps spending over the next 10 years with a mechanism that ensures that these cuts actually stick. It protects the American people from government default that would have affected every single one of them in one way or another. It puts in place a powerful joint committee that will recommend further cuts and much-needed reforms. It doesn't include a dime, not a dime, in job-killing tax hikes at a moment when our economy can least afford them. And crucially, it ensures the debate over a balanced budget amendment continues and that it actually gets a vote. Now, this is no small feat when you consider that just last week the President was still demanding tax hikes as part of any debt ceiling increase, and that as recently as May, the President's top economic advisor said it was, quote, insane, end quote, for anybody to even consider tying the debt ceiling to spending cuts. It's worth noting that 2.5 months later, that advisor is no longer working at the White House, and the President is now agreeing, as a condition of raising the debt ceiling, to trillions of dollars in spending cuts. So let me be clear. The legislation the Senate is about to vote on is just a first step, just a first step. But it is a crucial step toward fiscal sanity, and its potentially remarkable achievement given the lengths to which some in Washington have gone to ensure a status quo that's suffocating growth, crippling the economy, and imperiling entitlements. Now, we've had to settle for less than we wanted, but what we've achieved is in no way insignificant. And we did it because we had something Democrats didn't have. Republicans may only control 1/2 of the government in Washington, but the American people agreed with us on the nature of the problem. They know that government didn't accumulate $14.5 trillion in debt because it didn't tax enough. And if you're spending yourself into oblivion, the solution isn't to spend more, it's to spend less. Now, neither side got everything it wanted in these negotiations. But I think it was the view of those in my party that we try to get as much spending cuts as we could from a government we didn't control. Our view was we'd get as much spending reduction as we could from a government we didn't control. And that's what we've done with this bipartisan agreement. This is not the deficit reduction package I would have written. The fact that we're on a pace to add another $7 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years is certainly nothing to celebrate. But getting it there from more than $9 trillion, the President continued to defend until recently, is no defeat either. And slowing down the big government freight train from its current trajectory will give us the time we need to work toward a real solution, or give the American people the time they need to have their voices heard. So much work remains. And to that end, our first step will be to make sure that Republicans who sit on the powerful cost-cutting committee are serious people who put the best interests of the American people and the principles that we've fought for throughout this debate first. But before we move to the next steps, I'd like to say a word about some of those who made today's vote possible. And I'll start with Speaker Boehner. It should be noted that he helped set the terms of this debate by insisting early on that we'd oppose any debt limit that didn't include cuts that were greater than the amount the debt limit would be raised. And he stuck to his guns. The Speaker and I have worked shoulder to shoulder over the past few months, and it's certainly been a pleasure. He's been a real partner, and I assure my colleagues we wouldn't be here without him. So I want to thank the Speaker and the entire Republican leadership in the House for standing on principle. And I want to thank my Republican colleagues here in the Senate for their determination, their ideas, and their support. We wouldn't be here without them either. And I want to thank my friend, the Majority Leader, for his work in getting this agreement over the finish line. We may disagree a lot, but I hope everyone realizes it's never, ever personal. And I think today we can prove that when it comes down to it, we'll get together when the greater good is at stake. I also want to thank the President and the Vice President and everyone on their staffs who believed, as we did, that despite our many differences, we could all agree that America would not default on its obligations. It's a testament to the goodwill of those on both sides that we were able to reach this agreement in time. Neither side wanted to see the government default, and I'm pleased we were able to work together to avoid it. Now, this bill does not solve the problem, but it at least forces Washington to admit that it has one. The bill doesn't solve the problem, but it forces Washington to admit that it has one. And it puts us on a path to recovery. We're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of restoring balance But there should be absolutely no doubt about this. We have changed the debate. We're headed in the right direction. And people are wondering how it happened. Well, it happened because the American people demanded it. So in the end, we're back to where we started. The only reason we're talking about passing legislation that reins in the size of Washington instead of growing it is because the American people believed they could have a real impact on the direction of their government. They spoke out, and we heard them. And it's only through their continued participation in this process and lawmakers who are willing to listen to them that we'll complete the work we've begun. As Winston Churchill once said, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. I can't think of a better way to sum up this last year, and in particular these last few months right here in Washington, than that. The American people want to see accountability and cooperation in Washington, and they want to see that we're working together to get our fiscal house in order. This legislation doesn't get us there, but for the first time in a very long time, I think we can say to the American people that we're finally facing in the right direction. And for that, we have them to thank.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader, the Senator from Nevada.
The eyes of America and the world have been watching Washington this past week very closely. And while they witnessed a lot of political wrangling, they also saw Congress make some historic, important decisions and avert a default on our debt that has been so concerning to all of us for such a long period of time. Our country was literally on the verge of a disaster. It was on the brink of a disaster. One day left, we were able to get together and avert that disaster. Now, this compromise that we've reached is not perfect. And I feel it's important. Mr. President, can we have order, please?
The Senate will please come to order. We welcome all our visitors and want to make it clear that any disturbance or manifestation of approval or disapproval is prohibited under the Senate rules. The Majority Leader may proceed.
I appreciate the kind words that my counterpart, Senator McConnell, has stated on the floor. I've gotten to know him and Speaker Boehner a lot better this past month or two, especially the Speaker. And even though I disagree vehemently with the direction the Speaker's legislation took, with no bipartisan support at all, it is not what the product we have here. The product we have here is one of compromise. The winners, without trying to outline who the winners are, there's principally one winner through all this, and it's the American people. We settled for less than we wanted. So did my friend, the leader of the Republicans, settle for less than they wanted. But that's the way legislation works. That's the way compromise works. But I can't let go without responding to my friend who boasted about, in his own way, about the new senators and the new members of Congress who came here. I welcome them all, but a result of the Tea Party direction of this Congress the last few months has been very, very disconcerting and very unfair to the American people. It stopped us from arriving at a conclusion much earlier, and we must go forward. And also, Mr. President, I recognize we have to do more. Of course we need to do more. And that's why we have the Joint Committee set up that I'll talk about in just a minute. The American people are not impressed with the no new revenue. The vast majority of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans think this arrangement that we've just done is unfair because the richest of the rich have contributed nothing to this. The burden of what has taken place is on the middle class and the poor. My friend talks about no new taxes. Mr. President, if their theory was right, these huge taxes that took place during the Bush 8 years, the economy should be thriving. These tax cuts have not helped the economy. The loss of 8 million jobs during the Bush 8 years, Two wars started unfunded, all borrowed money, these tax cuts, all on borrowed money. If the tax cut were so good, the economy should be thriving. If you go back to the prior 8 years, during President Clinton's administration, 23 million new jobs were created. We had, when President Bush took office, a surplus over 10 years of $7 trillion. That has evaporated, and now we're talking about a $14 trillion debt. The compromise we reached is imperfect. And we're going to send legislation to the President today that will not only avert a default, but make significant deficit reductions. Is that enough? I repeat, no, not enough. This legislation will provide our economy with stability it desperately needs. And to assure Congress that we will continue working, and I said this yesterday, I say it again, I appreciate my friend, the Republican leader, putting his arms around the idea that I came up with to have this joint committee. They've worked in decades past. There's no reason it can't work now. No supermajority. Each leader will appoint 3, a committee of 12. We need to do something because the trigger that kicks in is very, very difficult. We need to do this. And it has to be one that's fair. The American people demand fairness. It can't be more cuts to programs that have made this country what it is. There must be a sharing of sacrifice. It's really unfair for billionaires and multimillionaires not to be contributing to the arrangement that we just made. But they're not. My friends, the Republicans, held firm and no revenue, which is really too bad. We need to have a fair approach to this joint committee, and I'm confident we will do that. And one reason we're going to do that is because of the trigger mechanism that kicks in. Now, this committee that was going to be appointed, the members, I say here, must have open minds. We've had too much talk the last few days of Republicans, as early as this morning, Republican leaders in the Senate saying there will be no revenue. That's not going to happen. Otherwise, the trigger is going to kick in. The only way we can arrive at a fair arrangement for the American people with this joint committee is to have equal sharing. It's going to be painful. Each party, if they do the right thing, it's going to be painful for them because to be fair, we have to move forward. There has to be equal spending cuts. There has to be some revenue that matches that. The legislation that's going to be sent to the President today ends a standoff that ground the work of Washington to a halt this summer. So Congress must now return to its most important job, creating jobs. Now, Mr. President, there are things we can do to create jobs. We know that. We've passed out of here quickly the patent bill. 270,000 jobs we're told that legislation will create. So we'll move to that the first time we get back after the summer break. We're going to move to the patent legislation. It's important we do that. There are other things we can do. There are things out there that should be bipartisan in nature that we can do. We have a highway bill that's due. I spoke to the chairman of the Finance Committee today. There are ways we can fund that should be in keeping with the bipartisan approach to this. The important thing that we have, Mr. President, with these infrastructure jobs we need so very much, is that for every $1 billion we spend in infrastructure, we create 47,500 high-paying jobs. A lot of other jobs that spin off from that. Now, these aren't jobs that you have $1 billion and you have all these jobs are jobs that the federal government does. These are monies that go to the private sector to build roads, bridges, and dams. We need to do that, and we can do that. Clean energy jobs. They're changing the face of this nation. We need to do that. I'm optimistic and hopeful that the spirit of compromise that has taken root in Washington over the last several days will endure. I hope my Republican colleagues will join forces with Democrats to put America back to work and not be looking for winners in political parties, but let's start looking for winners with the American people. We've made progress toward cutting the goal. We've made progress toward our goal of cutting the deficit spending that we have around here. This nation still faces a jobs deficit as well. There's no issue more important to the American people than job creation. Until every American who chooses to work can find a job, our job is undone. So we're going to continue making jobs our #1 priority. We ask the Republicans to join with us in this regard. Adlai Stevenson once called politics, quote, the people's business, the most important business there is. That's what Adlai Stevenson said. So, Mr. President, it's time for Congress to get back to doing the people's business, creating jobs. Nothing is more important than that. Mr. President, I ask for the yeas and nays on my motion to concur.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be a sufficient second. The yeas and nays are ordered, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. No. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Beckich, Bingaman, Blunt, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Cantwell, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Corker, Cornyn, Crapo, Durbin, Franken, Hagan, Hutchison, Isaacson, Johans, Kyle, Landrieu, Leahy, Levin, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, McConnell, Mikulski, Murray, Pryor, Risch, Rockefeller, Stabenow, Tester, Thune, Warner, and Wyden. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Roberts, aye. Mr. Schumer? Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Enzi, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Ayotte, Chambliss, Graham, Grassley, Hatch, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lautenberg, Lee, Moran, Paul, Rubio, and Vitter. Mr. Menendez, no. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mr. Hoeven, aye. Mr. Coburn, no. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, aye. Mr. Harkin, no. No. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Sessions, no. Mrs. Feinstein? Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Nelson? Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Shelby? Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Casey? Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Heller, no. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Dement, no. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska, no. Ms. Murkowski? Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Coates, no. Cochran? Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Carrie. Aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Aye. Ms. Snow. Aye.
Senate will come to order. Have all senators voted? Any senators wish to change their vote? If not on that question, the ayes are 74 and the nays are 26. The motion to concur in the House amendment to Senate Bill 365 is agreed to. Late on.